Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
Well, from one war front to another, Russia has launched a new overnight drone attack on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. Acknowledging the attack, Ukraine said that out of the 76 Shahid drones launched over 12 regions in the center, south and east, 72 were shot down by the air defenses. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said he feared a potential Russian strike on Ukrainian power plants. Addressing a forum in Kyiv, Sullivan said they've taken shots at Ukraine's nuclear power plants before, and I think we could see that again.
We are currently working on a substantial package, pulling together a range of different capabilities that we are going to try to get out the door before the end of this month. Again, this is not a matter of political will. It's a matter of busting through the difficult and complicated logistics and operational details to actually deliver this material to the front.
The statement comes as Ukraine continues to plead west to ease restrictions on the use of long-range missiles. Well, Ukraine has the legal right to strike targets in Russia, and this is according to the chair of the NATO Military Committee, Admiral Rob Bauer, and also the chief of the General Staff of the Czech Armed Forces. They were answering a question on consensus among military chiefs on this very issue.
If nations give weapon systems to Ukraine, it is their right as well to have certain limitations in the use of those weapons because they feel responsible for those weapons. And that is a political discussion, and that is what happens, and where some nations have a different opinion. But if you ask me as a military man, is it possible? The answer is yes.
Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said that he, along with US President Joe Biden, will discuss Ukraine's use of ATACMS and also Shadow missiles into Russia at the UNGA next week. This despite Russian President Vladimir Putin's warning that NATO would be at war with Moscow if it gives Kyiv the go-ahead and the green light to use long-range missiles. Both UK and US have raised fears that Russia has shared nuclear secrets with Iran. This in return for Tehran supplying Moscow with ballistic missiles to bomb Ukraine, a move condemned globally. The foreign ministers of the G7 countries have pulled up Iran for its support to what it called Moscow's illegal war against Kyiv. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine on Saturday conducted a prisoner exchange with a total of 206 individuals being released from both the sides. The deal was brokered by UAE, marking the country's 8th such mediation since the start of 2024.
Russia threatens NATO and Trump assassin intrigue as the Ukraine war grinds on. Welcome to More War Mondays here on the Rob Maness Show, and we're live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, as you just heard there, NATO countries are openly contemplating supporting Ukraine's use of U.S. long-range weapons inside Russia to attack key targets. Of course, Russia's response is not surprising, as President Putin said this move will mean NATO and the USA are now at war with Russia. It's common sense, folks. Meanwhile, the war continues with Ukraine's incursion into Kursk, tying up their resources, and Russia continues to increase its control of considerable amounts of Ukraine territory on the Eastern Front since that incursion started over in Kursk. All of this is happening in the context of possibly the most contentious U.S. presidential election ever Even the Lincoln election before the Civil War wasn't this contentious, I don't believe. The Democrats and their media mouthpieces, including the President of the United States, continue to use violence inciting rhetoric. And of course, as predicted, a second assassination attempt happened yesterday. And Human Events' Jack Posobiec is reporting that attempted Trump assassin Ryan Roth appeared in a propaganda video for, wait for it, the Azov Battalion in May of 2022. The Azov Brigade was officially certified by the Blinken State Department to receive U.S. weapons in June of this year. And the same media that painted this neo-Nazi unit as heroic defenders is about to sweep Roth's background under the rug and, of course, brand us all as conspiracy theorists and domestic terrorists, of course. Well, my guest today is retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis. Dan is a 4-time combat vet in Desert Storm, OIF, Afghanistan twice, decorated for valor, and he's the author of a great book, 11th Hour in 2020 America, How America's Foreign Policy Got Jacked Up and How the Next Administration Can Fix It. And he's the host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Go check it out, subscribe to it, and share it. Colonel Davis, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir, for the first time.
I'm grateful to be here, Colonel. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, I'm surprised I haven't had you on before because we've been doing More War Mondays since January of this year. But I'm also thankful to my friend David, who comes into our space in our live audience for bringing you back to my attention, even though I've seen your show before a couple of times and I've seen you on some other outlets too, man. Well, let's do some tactical first before we hit the strategic. Just go around the horn in Ukraine, and Mr. Producer, if you bring that Ukraine map up, I appreciate it. This is from War Mappers, Dan, and I just want to give folks the context of where, and let's talk about the Kursk incursion first. You know, a little brown area up in the northern part of the map there is where Ukraine has gone across the border into the Kursk region. It is, I would say, at best, trying to distract Russia and not doing a very good job of it. And then on the right-hand side of this map is the territory that Russia occupies currently, including the red and the purple. And the changes there have been pretty dramatic since this Kursk incursion started. But Dan, is this Kursk thing going to amount to anything? It certainly looks like it's fizzling out to me, but honestly, I don't have any direct contacts on the ground over there.
Yeah, it's more than just fizzling out. It's starting to collapse, and it could never have been any other way. When you take literally like 15 to 20,000 troops and thinking you're going to actually invade into a country the size of Russia and have any kind of success, when you couldn't go, even through the first defense line in an entire offensive in 2023, it was just absurd. And it's ironic that a lot in the West said that this showed Putin's weakness because it's been now well over a month since that incursion happened, and they're saying, it still hasn't been whittled down, even though now, especially on the western flank of that, the Russians are starting to take back village after village. But I think when you look at what their intent was, the Russians, they were actually okay with this because, and it sounds a little odd to say you're okay with an incursion into your country, but there was no strategic value in here. There was no major cities. There was no military bases at all. So it didn't have any significant military capacity for Russia. However, by sending all of those troops and these apparently close to 20,000 total people have been involved with this, and hundreds of armored vehicles, the folks that they needed elsewhere and were some of their best trained and equipped with NATO stuff, et cetera, they've just been feeding it into this destruction chain. I mean, some people call it a meat grinder, but it may be even worse than that because it's just like sending people in to hold something that has no strategic value for you, and you're losing men, which is irreplaceable. The manpower is always the biggest issue, even more than the money or the machines. It's the men. And when they don't have the manpower to continue to fight this, and now then, because, as you pointed out a second ago, they weren't available to help in the East, that's now collapsing faster, and I don't see either of those trends reversing anytime soon.
Yeah, it's just kind of weird to me. I mean, I'm an Air Force guy, obviously, but I've studied this stuff. and been around enough of you Army guys and Marines to have this reaction to go, why are you putting your reserves in? Because they put their reserve ground forces
Right.
in to this operation that are supposed to be backing up the guys and gals down in the east, so that they're at least holding the Russians to just a few, meters a day, kind of in their offensive areas and everything. But that's not true. Bring up. Let's look at the numbers here real quick on the Russian side on the Eastern Front. Yeah, there it is. This is from War Mappers, also same place that the map is from, and you can see this is from July 28th, and I think the Kursk incursion started a few days after this, if I remember correctly, in early August, right?
Yeah,
And you look
August
at Donetsk
6th.
and Kharkiv. I mean, look at those numbers. And these graphs show what the increase has been to Russian occupation. I would say those are massive changes. Now, let's keep in mind that this is really like 21st century trench warfare, so the movements aren't that great on a daily basis. But those are dramatic changes, Dan. I think it's costing them dearly.
Yeah, and I think it's also important. This is a really good place to bring this up. That the Russian way of war is different than the American way of war. We think very much in terms of territory gain. And if you capture this city, or if you lose this city, then that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your perspective. And your objective is to try to take more territory. But in the Russian way of doing war, and has been this way for a long time, and it is definitely that way now, their objective is the destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces. Territory will come second. They do care about it, but it's subordinate to destroying the Ukraine's ability to wage war. That's part of Putin's announcement in February 2022 when he says the demilitarization of Ukraine. That's what he means. So that's why they were content to let this Kursk operation go on, because the more reserves and replacements Ukraine kept sending in there, Russia got it contained right away within just days. Yeah. And then they sent the time with the glide bombs, with attack aviation, with artillery, and even some limited ground incursions. They were just pummeling these guys because they just kept sending more in to be destroyed. Likewise, on the Eastern Front, even though they haven't gained a whole lot of territory, though, as you point out, it is increasing now, that's because they're having success at the primary objective of weakening the armed forces. So now then they're falling back faster. The issue could be at some point that a critical mass is reached, and we don't know where that would be, to where the cohesion of the Ukrainian defense could just snap and break. And then, because Russia does appear to have strategic reserves, that they could then flow into an area where there's now no defenses, and they could make these huge gains. It'll shock many in the West, but it won't shock people who've been paying attention.
Yeah, how many combat forces do they have in country right now? Do you know in round numbers?
The Russian side, this is according to the Ukrainian general staff, is somewhere just south of 600,000, but they expect it to be around 800,000 by the end of the year, based on the flow of troops that are coming in there. So it's a huge number. And by the way, I don't know if you saw that earlier. I guess it was last night or this morning, our time. Russia announced that they are expanding their active forces to 1.5 million army and 2.4 total million. And that is substantially larger than it was in February 2022. So while they've suffered a lot of losses, their net is much bigger, while the Ukraine side is shrunk.
Yeah, and continuing to shrink because they don't have the manpower to tap into. I mean, they're at draft age. He's getting older and older and older on the Ukraine side. And that's the living proof of it, is what I call it, that things aren't going well, and Russia's got all these strategic reserves arrayed outside of the Ukrainian border. Right. And that's just not manpower, right? I mean, that is armored vehicles, personnel movers, aircraft, weaponry, artillery shells. I mean, they're pretty comfortable shooting 10,000 artillery rounds a day, aren't they?
They are, and that augurs a really bad thing for the Ukraine side, because it's not just that one day their defenses could crumble or break at some point, but a lot of evidence, if you look at what's being reported, is that Russia has been growing its force, and according to the Ukraine publicly announced statements, and this has been a couple of months ago, that Russia has somewhere around 300,000 troops outside of contact up in the direction of that border, and they have been cranking on the military production of artillery pieces, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and especially ammunition. way above what they're using, 10,000 or so on a day. So when you say, okay, if they're producing somewhere around, I believe it's a $250,000 a month is the number. They're up to 250,000. That's way more than they're using. So the question is, where are they storing the rest of those, and for what purpose? I think that it's very possible that they are getting ready for a large, big arrow movement, something we haven't seen since February of 2022. And many in the West believe will never come. They think that Russia hasn't done it because they can't. But I think if you look at what they appear to be preparing, something big could be coming.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, we got to take our first commercial breakdown. When we come back, I want to talk about something that I'm a lot more familiar with, and that is nuclear deterrence. And we'll hear a little clip about Mr. Putin and his nuclear weapons from our CIA director, Nick Burns. It won't disappoint, I'm sure. We'll be right back with retired Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis here on More War Mondays on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
None of us should take lightly the risks of escalation. There was a moment in the fall of 2022 when I think there was a genuine risk of, the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons. I have never thought, however, and this is the view of my agency, that we should be unnecessarily intimidated by that.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we've got author and retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis with us today. He's the host of a great YouTube show called the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You got to check it out. Go like it, share it, subscribe to it, because some great military, from the tactical to the strategic information on his program. And Dan, that's the U.S. CIA director, and Nick Burns, who I would add is a China-compromised individual from the Chinese Communist Party. Just keep that in mind as you listen to him. And that height of arrogance that you hear from his voice and his body language is really indicative of what's been going on from a nuclear deterrence perspective in this particular conflict the entire time. I mean, the first thing that Putin did within days of going back into Ukraine was say that he put his nuclear forces on a higher state of readiness alert. Not just the tactical ones, but the strategic. And our response was to cancel our regularly scheduled mission-ready intercontinental ballistic missile launch that we do out of Vandenberg Air Force Base, where we take a mission-ready missile out of its hull, replace the warhead with telemetry, put the maintenance people, the security people, and the command and control people all out there and fire the missile to demonstrate that it's safe, secure, reliable, etc. We canceled it. And Biden's done that twice when faced with increasing rhetoric on the use of nuclear weapons since February of 2022. And then you have guys like this that are giving him advice. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of almost like split personality kind of thing. It doesn't make sense even what he said at face value. So he's citing the information, which, by the way, was published by Jim Sciutto of CNN in a book he published earlier this year, where he chronicled that Russia was really close to using a tactical nuclear weapon in the fall of 2022 when they had lost Kherson City. They had been driven out of the Kharkiv area, and apparently they were seriously thinking about using it then because they were concerned about their losses, and they had to be talked out of it. So one would think that the wise course of action for the United States would be to say, okay, these guys are willing to use nuclear weapons if things go poorly against them tactically. So let's don't put them in a position to where they might do it again. And instead of drawing the right conclusion, you had him saying, mocking them basically, of, they were going to use them. But I told them that, don't do that because, we'll crush you or whatever. And now then you're talking about, let's use long range weapon systems in the direct statement by Putin that he'll consider that as a direct engagement of the war by the United States and UK and France against Russia and take appropriate countermeasures. And they talked about Lavrov specifically. We have updated our nuclear doctrine. So why would you want to find out where the red lines really are on nuclear weapons when it gains nothing for us to do, even tactically, and it could potentially plunge us into a war? I just don't understand his arrogance, that this confidence that because he told them something, they're not going to fire nuclear weapons.
Yeah, in the nuclear realm, you watch what actions countries and forces take. You don't necessarily listen to the rhetoric as much, and that's why it's important. When if Putin increases his readiness of his nuclear forces and we weaken ours, that's why in the fall of 2022 they were seriously considering the use of tactical nuclear weapons, because we didn't keep in his mind that the risk was too high to even contemplate them. You know what I mean? I mean, that's how nuclear deterrence is supposed to work, right?
Yeah, and I think that you can maybe draw the conclusion that Putin doesn't think that we would use nuclear weapons, because he said rightfully that he doesn't want to go down this path because the consequences could be catastrophic for mankind, including his own country, but that he's willing to go down that path if he thinks that's necessary. Well, what we should show is, number one, we have a nuclear capacity which we would use if we're attacked, but we're not going to go pushing you into using it itself. But we have the ability and the willingness to do it if we do. I think that's part of what you're suggesting there, is that we got to have a strong deterrent, but that means wisely not getting into a situation where you make them think that using nuclear weapons is a good play. And right now I'm telling you, with this long range missile stuff, Putin was right in his assessment that it can only be done with the direct participation of the United States or UK or France in these use of these missiles. And we would regard any use of a Russian missile against our homeland, I assure you, as an act of war, and we would take action too. Why do we think he would be different?
Yeah, look what we did when they just surfaced a submarine, and I think it was a destroyer level class ship over in Cuba and just off our coast. We mobilized the P8s and all the ASW stuff and sent it right on out there without even thinking about it. So yeah, absolutely. So Dan, exactly on the ATACMS, which I think is specifically what we're talking about here. Describe for folks exactly what the U.S. involvement has to be, because this isn't like, here, Ukraine, here's a musket, here's some black powder, here's some balls and some wadding, go for it. You can't do that with this thing, right?
No, you absolutely cannot. And not only do we have to have the platform, I mean, this is not like, say, with the M1 tank, where we could give you training and for however many months in Germany and then ship you the tanks and then, good luck, hope they work out well for you. This one, because of the guidance system and how it's actually fired, and a lot of this stuff is ground mapping situation. It requires satellite imagery and satellite connections in order to evade air defense systems, et cetera. It's very complex. And the amount of technical expertise among the operators and at the strategic level to get it on target, to identify the targets, that can only be done from the United States. Ukraine can't do that. So if the weapons are used, no matter, even if they send them out in a launcher and it's a Ukraine soldier that pulls the trigger, he's only connecting the dots of the other things that the U.S. only is doing. So, and it almost doesn't matter, how much of that is the U.S. and how much of Ukraine. If Putin believes that it's primarily the U.S., and certainly we have now admitted that a lot of that is accurate, it matters what he thinks. And if he takes actions based on that, as we would, then we have a potential for escalation, which is totally unnecessary and in no way improves our strategic condition.
And us allowing the Ukrainians to do this, let me just get your take on this, then I'll say what I think. Does it ensure any possibility that the Ukrainians could win in this conflict?
Zero, 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 zero. That's one of the things I keep harping on here, is that it won't make any difference because, number one, we don't have enough of them. You had the Secretary of Defense Austin admit last week in the New York Times that we don't have enough of them. We're in the process of transitioning over to a different kind of long-range weapon, so we haven't been making many more of the ATACMs, and we don't have very many of them to give. And for this to even have a chance of success, and for the moment take off the escalation risk, but just on the
Right.
tactical surface of it, you have to conduct a long-range missile campaign. I mean, months long of sustained bombing because Russia has really good air defenses, so they're going to knock a lot of them down. So you have to have numbers. You have to be able to overcome their systems, and then you have to hit the right stuff. And by the way, hitting a building or a airplane, it's not enough. You have to just really pummel an area, as we're seeing on the Ukraine side. Russia has been doing this for almost 2 years now, a campaign of relentless bombing where there's sometimes up to 100 airstrikes per day all across Ukraine. And even though it's painful, it hasn't knocked them out of the war. So why do we think that hitting Russia with a few of these, or especially a relatively small number, is going to have even an operational impact, much less a strategic one, when it hasn't here? And have we knocked out the Houthis, by the way, with all of our strikes? Did we knock out the Taliban with this massive number of airstrikes that they couldn't defend against at all? I mean, you see, it never worked, and it hasn't worked against Ukraine. It won't work against Russia.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why the key to success in warfare is combined arms. You can use certain things for certain
100%.
tasks, like air dominance. I can achieve air dominance over a certain area for a certain period of time for a purpose. I can achieve air superiority and keep it, but really what's happening on the geography on the ground beyond my lines, it's hit and miss. What the effectiveness of that is, a combined and joint operation, combined arms. It's the only way you can win in a war. And the Russians, they appear to be in a strategic air campaign, and they've combined it with this frontline approach to certain key towns and villages that they think will achieve their taking over lines of communication and logistics and those kinds of things in the right areas. And I think you're right. I think they're going for some kind of breakthrough, and they're just biding their time.
That's what it looks like to me. And there's a combination of some of the things you just mentioned where they're going after specific targets, but they're also concurrently with their overall strategic objective of destroying the Ukrainian armed forces by having these like this. It took whatever it was, 9 months, I think, to take Bakhmut, 9 or 10 months to take Avdiivka. They've been going against Vuhledar actually for like a year and a half. And some of the other Toretsk, et cetera. They've been going after it for a long time, but they seem content with just letting Ukraine just keep throwing man after man after man and destroying them, as opposed to try and, have decisive maneuver to take the village. They seem content to just let the Ukraine side dwindle its own resources by throwing all these troops into it to be destroyed. So, that they're doing both things simultaneously, it appears to me.
Yeah, the old adage, "Don't interrupt your enemy when he's doing something that helps you," comes to mind there, because I mean it's just like a big wall of sausage grinder, and they just keep putting stuff up against it. It doesn't matter whether it's an M1 tank. I think the Bradleys survive a little bit better, but the M1 tanks did terrible. The Leopard tanks have just been decimated, from what I can tell. Yeah. And there's been massive changes. There've been massive revolutions in warfare, really, during this combat that we've seen with the new technology. And I want to get into that in the next segment a little bit, and get your views on things like use of first-person view drones, the thermite dragon that we've seen recently, and those kind of things. So when we come back from this break, we'll dive into that a little bit, Dan, and take another look at the strategic arrogance of the United States of America and the West. And it's probably going to be our downfall in this particular conflict, more than likely. I'll be right back with Daniel Davis. And we're talking More War Monday in the Ukraine conflict.
Putin's whole narrative right now is a very cocky, very smug one. It's time's on my side. It's only a matter of time before the Ukrainians are going to be ground down and all of their supporters in the West are going to be worn down, and I'll be able to dictate my terms for a settlement. And I think, what these events have done, the Kursk offensive most recently, is to put a dent in that narrative. And it does raise questions in the Russian elite about what is all this for.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking Ukraine. Got a tactical update, and we're talking the strategic level. And my guest today is retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and author Daniel Davis. He's also the host of his own show on YouTube, the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, which is fascinating. You guys got to go check it out. So subscribe to it, share that thing. And quite honestly, Dan, this clip is in the same little happening that Burns was in when he made the comment about the nuclear weapons. But he's so easy to show the arrogance of the United States on. If our intelligence agencies, and he said these are his agency's views, if that intelligence agency's views is coloring the decision making of NATO and the United States about this war, no wonder we're where we're at, isn't it?
Yeah, honestly, in some ways, this one was even more weird than the first one, because the first part of that clip there, he lays out that Putin is arrogant and cocky. And who's to argue with that? He is definitely cocky, because the rest of his mocking commentary was accurate. He said he thinks that he's in a position, he's grinding down the enemy, which we just talked about, and that at some point he's going to be able to issue terms of his own. And then he says, but this deal into Kursk put a dent in that. And the Russian elite are against him. And I'm like, what planet are you on? Are you kidding me? The whole Kursk thing just shows how ridiculous the Ukraine side is. There was never any chance for any kind of success with that. It was never going to hurt Russia. It wasn't even an important area. There's no towns or anything there. They're just out in a bunch of forest, dying in large numbers on a regular basis. And Putin's happy to let you keep putting guys in there. And now he's at some point going to shut the thing off, and it's going to be as though you weren't ever there, which is going to further weaken the Ukraine side. And then to say that the Russian elite is against him, listen, the only thing that the Russian elite have had against Putin is that they wonder why he's kept the gloves on. He's been wanting him to, the elite has been wanting him to go further and harder against the Ukraine side instead of what he's been doing now. So he's wrong on everything, and it's not even hard to figure out. This is kind of self-evident stuff, and I agree with you. If this is the kind of publicity or the advice that our president is getting, that the senior NATO people are getting, that this is the best, and apparently the MI6 guy who was on the stage with him there was saying a lot of the same kind of stuff. It's like, holy cow, what chance do we have if our advisors listen to these people?
It's like they're all under the same psychological delusion. Somehow they've convinced themselves that they're right, but they're obviously wrong. A question for you on the support inside Russia. I think the elite support Putin and are wondering, hey, why aren't you just going ahead and getting this done? But aren't the citizens really, in by and large, I think most citizens are supportive of Putin at this point?
Look, again, this is not hard to figure out. Okay, look at what the United States did on 9/11. We got attacked, and everybody came together, and we're ready to go and bomb anyone in the world. You're either with us or against us, all that kind of stuff. Russia has been now part of their country has been invaded. The whole thing started because the NATO alliance was going to move right up to the front door of Russia, which they viewed as an existential threat. And since that time, it has been avowedly 50 nations, which we brag about every day, going against Russia, i.e., it's the world against Russia right there. And now then you've already fired drones and other stuff into cities all over the place in Russia, in Belgorod, in Saratov, in Moscow here recently. Why does anyone in the West think that the Russians are going to have these foreign people attack their country and then turn against their president? The opposite is happening, and it's predictable as can be. It's going to galvanize them to push their guy to do more. And that's exactly what's happening so far. His approval rating is like 72% right now, which is astronomical compared to anyone in the West. They don't even dream about numbers that high. So all the evidence shows, and it's, again, this is not hard to figure out. You can see it with your own eyes. Why do we keep saying something that's self-evidently untrue? That's the part that's puzzling.
Yeah, it is. It is very puzzling. And honestly, your book, which was published some years ago, that was what it was about, right? I mean, we're doing the things today that you talked about in your book that was wrong with over 2 decades of American national security policy, aren't we? We continue to do those and actually are tripling down on it.
I did. I was actually looking at it last month to try and remember some of the things I specifically said about either Russia or China or the Middle East. And I outlined all the details of things that had gone wrong with the foreign policy and what the Nixon administration, which turned out to be the Biden administration, because this came out before the election, needed to do. And they've almost done the opposite of all those. They've made all the bad things worse. I actually, if I had the time, I was going to write a reprise of this, and it was going to be 11:59 in 2024 America. If the last one was the 11th hour, now it's right before midnight. And I'm telling you, we are on the brink of potential major catastrophe because we're playing around with fire unnecessarily in the Russia-Ukraine deal. We're still in the middle of everything going on in the Middle East, and we could be drawn into a war easily there. And we're still pushing a lot of stuff on the Indo-Pacific area with China, et cetera. And I'm telling you, whether any particular issue has merits, we don't have an armed forces that's capable of fighting one of these major wars, let alone more than one of them. Because if we get into a big structure, we can't even give Ukraine enough long-range missiles. You think that we would have enough of our own? And of course, our artillery production is a little higher than it was, but it's only a little higher and definitely not enough to sustain combat in a long war. It's like the kind that's being waged right now. We can't fight that. And by the way, our entire army, total active duty, is 450 some odd thousand, which is about 150,000 less than Russia has in Ukraine today, and a third of what they have overall. And you think we can have all of our global commitments and with the difficulties we have recruiting, et cetera? Colonel, I'm telling you, we are not in a position to fight one war, even if it stayed conventional, let alone go nuclear. And our administration is just playing with existential fire for no reason, because we don't need to be in any of these wars, and our security shouldn't even be at risk. That's my big problem.
Yeah, and you see it in the behavior of the adversaries, especially like the Chinese Communist Party in the South China Sea, the Philippines area, and the encroachments into the Philippines territorial waters intentionally, the almost blockading of the island of Taiwan for short periods of time when they surround it by air and sea. Almost at will, whenever they appear they want to. We've moved our Indo-Pacific aircraft carrier battle group over to the Middle East at this point. I mean, we are taking some risk right now that I've never seen us take it in my lifetime. I served for over 32 years. My dad was in the Cold War for 23 years. So we covered from the 1950s up to 2012 almost. I was about a month shy of 2012. And I have never seen the United States taking so much risk. And, most of it evolves around manufacturing capabilities in-house, on our own shores, economics, and our inability to keep our commitments. Like, we can't even keep artillery shells supplied for the Ukrainians, where the Russians, they can fire 10,000 of them a day and not even be sweating.
Right. And it's so ironic, if not outright perverse, that you have so many of these war advocates, and this is not a left or right issue, Republican, Democrat. This is like the uniparty, I think I've heard some people call it, that just seem to lust for war. And they argue emphatically that the only reason you have Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, working together and taking action antithetical to American interest is because, they want to recreate empire or something like that. There's no reason for it, just because we're supporting one side to try to destroy the Russian side, for example, and we keep, doing things to help one side against another in the Middle East war, and we just throwing all of this stuff out there that we have, stuff from our own inventory, stuff that we would need if we were ever going to fight. And they have the audacity to say, it's American weakness that's drawing these people. Like our actions, our aggressive actions aren't even part of the calculation. That just out of nowhere, all these countries are moving together against us. And my God, we have to really do more, or Russia's coming after us and India, China's coming after. Look, they're not. China doesn't want a war. Russia does not want a war with the West. Iran does not want a war with the United States or Israel. All these can be managed diplomatically primarily. But if we even think that we're going to get into any one of these wars, we better do a lot more of getting the infrastructure we need and the force structure that we need, which, of course, I'm not advocating we go down that path. But I'm telling you, if policy-wise you're going to send us down that path, then don't put us in a position where we could lose a war because we don't have the capacity to sustain combat, short of nuclear weapons.
Well, yeah, I mean, just take the Pacific, the Indo-Pacific. We don't have enough sea lift, either the ability to manufacture it or the ability to man it. The story's kind of evaporated now, but the Navy's gonna put a certain number of ships in mothballs, basically, and free up several hundred sailors and everything. Well, that was all about sea lift. That's where that was coming from. We don't have enough. We don't have enough sea lift to control the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean together in order to be able to resource and mass enough force to be able to take that fight on, even just in defense of Taiwan, in my opinion. Quite honestly.
And a lot of the reason for that is because we don't have the manpower to have the ships. It's not even, well, I think I've seen the number. I may be a little off on this, but I think that China has somewhere around 20 times the ability to create shipping than we do, but we don't have the manpower, even if we could compete with them manufacturing wise, which we can't. But we're having to mothball ships we have now because we don't have enough sailors to man the thing because of our recruiting shortfalls. And why do we think people are going to want to rush and join the military when they see all of these dumb, wars that you're fighting all over the place, these forever wars, or sending people off into the Middle East and Iraq and in Syria or Somalia or Niger? What does that have to do with American security? And why do I want to go and get deployed there? Especially this new generation, they don't have any interest in that. But you have these policymakers up here who are worried about weapons contracts, if you're being honest. They don't seem to care about that. And they're creating tremendous strategic risk for our country that literally could be existential in a worst case. And I'm very alarmed by it.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, and look, I'm an advocate of peace through strength. I think we should reestablish it. I support Donald Trump because that's what his policy is going to be if he gets into a second administration. And there's plenty of work for the military-industrial complex guys to get done in a peace through strength strategy without having to go fight wars everywhere and wasting our kids' lives and our families' lives. There's plenty of work, plenty of dollars there. I mean, come on, man, as Joe Biden says. It just boggles my mind.
Yeah, I am unequivocally for a strong national security and a well-trained force, well-equipped and well-funded. Absolutely. But I am absolutely against constantly looking for work to try to send them over to all these places, because all that does is dissipate our strength. It does not build strength, and so it doesn't build peace either. But if we had a military, Reagan wasn't perfect and he had some errors, but a whole bunch of things he did right, which was to have a strong military and then not use it unless we were threatened, but have one that was strong enough so that no one would want to threaten us. And we did. I mean, that's how it worked out. And that's what the purpose of peace through strength. But that also implies a wise foreign policy to go along with it, or you fritter away your strength.
Absolutely. What you're seeing now, I think, is all this use of our capability, but it's hollow on the inside. And that's where the weakness parts come in. And the adversary sees that. Well, we got to take our last break, Dan. And when we come back, I have to talk about the assassin from yesterday because of this supposed Ukraine ties. I want to get your take on what that possibility is in reality versus what we see on social media. And we'll be right back with retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis here on More War Mondays. We're talking Ukraine and the risk associated with American and NATO foreign policy right now.
We live in uncertain times. In fact, we live at a time when our own governments all over the world are warning us that there could be big problems with our power grid. World War III seems to be right on the horizon. Let me ask you this. Do you have a satellite phone? Should communications go down with cell towers? Do you have a satellite phone to get a hold of that college student or your spouse who travels, whatever it might be, to get a hold of your senior adult parents? We have satellite phones at worldviewtalk.com, and you get the satellite phone for free when you sign up for their very reasonable payment programs for the service. Sign up for the service with a reasonable contract, get the satellite phone for free. Worldviewtalk.com. You'll also find they have, well, what I now have, which is a solar generator. Yeah, I have a gas generator, an LP propane generator, but what if that goes down? I want to back up to my backup. So I now have a solar generator as well. You'll find them at worldviewtalk.com. Check it out today, worldviewtalk.com.
Ukraine is reluctant to be cooperative.
That's Ryan Ruth, a U.S. citizen who set up the International Volunteer Center in Ukraine to help connect foreigners to Ukrainian military units.
Now I'm talking to over 100 soldiers every day, and pretty much everybody, all of my contacts in Ukraine, they were adamant, pretty much yelled at me every time that I suggested that we bring in Afghans.
The Ukrainian government didn't respond to our request for comment, but a source close to the officials in Kiev told Semaphore that their top concern is the question of loyalty in the thick fog of war.
The biggest thing is spies. They're afraid that anybody and everybody is a Russian spy.
Those concerns aren't completely unfounded. Russia's notorious private military group, Wagner, has reportedly begun recruiting Afghan commandos. Semaphore reviewed these text messages from Afghan soldiers, which tell the same story.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. It's More War Monday, and we're getting an update on Ukraine. Our guest today is retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and author Daniel Davis, and host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Folks, you got to go check that show out, subscribe to it, and share it because a lot of great information over there. And Dan, we have to talk about this guy today, this Ryan Ruth guy. When you go and look at his X account, that's the only one that I was able to see, and we did a little mining on that last night. There's all these little implied connections, and some appear to be firm connection to the fight that's going on in Ukraine, embedded in a whole bunch of some people call it lunacy political rhetoric, but really when you think about what Americans have been hearing from the neocons and the Democrats that are supporting this war so much, he kind of was just regurgitating what he's been hearing in the mainstream media when you look at the lunacy stuff. But he says that he went to Kiev, tried to join the International Legion, I think was turned down. And then he established this recruiting center there. Have you ever heard of this guy? I mean, he seems to have gotten around. He's been interviewed by Newsweek and I think the New York Times, maybe.
Yeah, I actually read this morning. I read this morning that about the New York Times reporter that interviewed him about a year or so ago, and his comment was, you know, he seemed kind of a little flaky, but also he made lots of brags that he couldn't produce any evidence for whatever. So the guy said, I just didn't even contact him again or lost sight of him until all this stuff blew. And from all we can piece together so far, and obviously it's still kind of early, he does look like somebody who's not entirely balanced, shall we say. But that's kind of the problem, I think, to where you were alluding to, that when you hear all of this rhetoric and somebody who's not entirely balanced, when they hear that stuff and they think, yeah, I'm going to make good on this man, because Trump, if he gets elected, he wants to end the war. He wants to bring it to a negotiated settlement. He doesn't even want Ukraine to win, according to what he said on the debate the other day. He just wants the war to be over. And man, I want Ukraine to win, so I better take some action or something to that effect. You know, you never know. And listen, I'm not like blaming everybody who's against Trump politically. That's fair game. Anybody can be against somebody and for somebody else. That's part of our democracy. But when you have some people who are unhinged out there, and especially if the rhetoric goes too far, then you have the risk of something like this happening.
Well, yeah, in late June, the President of the United States himself effectively said on Twitter or on X that threat is the threat to democracy here in America. He is an absolute threat. I think he used the word absolute in one of his tweets. I mean, that's the president of the United States. He's supposed to have all of the information, and I think some people believe it. But this is the kind of guy, though, that an intelligence agency or a criminal enterprise that's organized would go after, right, and try to recruit. I mean, isn't it safe to have an educated assumption that since he was in Ukraine multiple times and has developed all these contacts, that he's probably come in contact with intelligence agencies, other military type intelligence operatives, and those kind of things?
Well, we certainly can't eliminate that possibility. I personally don't. I haven't even seen a lot of those tweets, so I really couldn't talk about the nature of some of them. But it's definitely within the wheelhouse of intelligence agencies to find people who are a little unhinged if they think they can use them to do something else, sort of Manchurian Candidate kind of situation here. So that's entirely possible.
Do you think with the rhetoric we hear from, and not just the Democrats, but people like I mentioned, the Loonicons, the neocons, little Freudian slip there. That's a good word though, Loonicons, the neocons that
maybe more accurate. I don't know.
Yeah, they're very concerned when you look at their rhetoric about Trump winning, because he says that, his policy is to end this war and stop the killing as quickly as possible. I mean, he's not been as clear on the Middle East war, but he's definitely been clear on this war, and he has an idea of what he's going to do to do it.
Yeah, and I think all of the rhetoric, especially after the June assassination attempt, the Democrats really, I think, were guilty of going way over the top because they kept saying that he was an existential threat to democracy, and this man has to be stopped, and using really strong language that, and we still to this day don't know what the Crooks, the kid from the Butler, Pennsylvania, we still don't know what his motives was. But we know that was pretty strong rhetoric, and someone, again, who's not entirely balanced can think they're doing a favor for their side or something like that and act on it. And so to their credit, the Democrats at least a little bit toned down some of the stronger rhetoric, though they didn't eliminate it. But they haven't, at least to my knowledge, said that against Trump in terms of the Ukraine war, even though they think that his policies are bad. I haven't heard them talk about him being a danger to it, but I can assure you that people on the Ukraine side are very worried about it. And I mean, again, I don't have any evidence, but you can see where it would be who's got motive, and somebody who doesn't want Trump to be elected because they want Ukraine to keep getting the same support that Biden's been given. You can see why they don't want Trump to win. So that becomes, again, something possible that we just have to be really, really vigilant about.
Yeah, I mean, motive and opportunity with him going and visiting there and making all those contacts and everything. Once you have those two things, anything's possible. It'll be interesting to see. Well, we've got a live audience, and we haven't had many questions today. Usually we have one segment, but I do have a hand up over there with a question for you, Daniel. Go ahead, Shelley.
What is?
All right, sir. We have a question from our audience. Hello Vortex is asking, can it be explained why this administration would want to frame Iran for this attempt? Why would they have if the last attempt succeeded?
Well, I think this is a pretty big stretch to say that Iran was behind it. But honestly, there's so much antagonism to Iran, and this is also something that spans both, more like a uniparty. These Loonicons, as you called them a minute ago, if they can tie anything to Iran to make it say, yeah, let's go after them, I think they would do that. But I haven't seen any evidence that would actually really tie them together.
No, I think they may be referring to it was probably, I think it was CNN that did a story either late last night or this morning, kind of laying it out there again. The same crowd that tried to tie it to the last one. In loose terms, because they don't have any direct evidence. There's no direct evidence.
And by the way, if Iran was going to send an assassin, they're not going to send some guy who's kind of a loony with an AK-47 and a scope, because that's not an assassination weapon. So that seems to be unlikely to me.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Although there is independent reporting, he did exhibit some signs of some training. And the just before I came on the show, they were
He
reporting
may
that
have, but
his cell phone
a guy who wants to
was
actually
at
hit the
location.
target's not going to choose an AK-47.
I think it was an SKS, is what the all the gun guys are saying now,
Oh.
but I'm not sure that makes any difference. Well, Dan, I appreciate you coming on. Let's close it out with kind of relating to your book a little bit on what do you see now, since you've admitted you thought about doing a follow-on book about this, what the next administration has to get done in the first year in order to get us back started to a track of peace through strength.
Yeah, I don't have any hesitation on that. We need to get rid of all these stupid wars that we can't fight, should not fight, and may lose if we fight, and get a foreign policy that says we're going to defend our country, and then start reforming and rebuilding the armed forces so that they can actually fight in modern wars. And we're way behind the curve on this, as exemplified by what's been going on, not just in the current war between Russia and Ukraine, but even the Azerbaijan-Armenia war in 2020 before that. And we've been making some changes, but they're like this much compared to this is what we need. We need to figure out the recruiting. We need to start giving the guys a reason to want to join the Army or the armed forces. And to actually give them the high quality training that they may need in combat, and quit frittering it away on all these ridiculous little things like in Iraq and 900 in Syria and a handful and spattered all across the world, which just dissipates our ability to train for real battles that we may someday need to fight. We need to be ready to fight before it happens and not be fighting wars we don't even need to fight.
Yeah, because if we're ready to fight, we've proven that we end up not having to fight in a major peer-to-peer conflict, quite honestly.
Absolutely.
Well, Dan, thank you very much for joining us today. Tell folks real quick what your coordinates are on the social medias and everything, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah, the Twitter is Daniel, capital L, capital D, Davis, Daniel L. Davis 1, the number 1. That's our Twitter handle. And then you can just Google on YouTube Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you'll find us right there.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. We'll get you back someday soon, because we never, unfortunately, run out of things to talk about on More War Monday. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and author Daniel Davis, folks. Go check out his show. It's really good. You got to subscribe to that. Well, tomorrow's Training Tuesday, and we've got reports from the ground in Pennsylvania, ballot chase operations. Cliff Maloney of PA Chase is with us to discuss what's happening, where we need to go to win Pennsylvania. We'll see you then on World YouTube at the Rob Maness Show.